Hello, everybody. This is Chad Eves, along with co-host Michael Gansel, for this episode of the Meaningful Communication Show. Happy winter. Happy 2024. This is our second show. Those of you in the Midwest, like Brian and I here, hope you're enjoying the snow. It's coming one way or the other if you haven't gotten it yet. And Michael, you have brought Brian to the show. Would you like to introduce him to our audience?
Sure, I'd love to do that. Welcome, Brian. Good to see you chat again. I understand a lot of snow for both of you because both of you in the Chicago area, and we're only going to get rain. What can I say? Well, we'll take rain if we have to. I would prefer snow, but anyway. So let me introduce Brian Glibkowski, who I met through a mutual friend of ours, Mason Harris. And so Dr. Brian Glibkowski is an award-winning author, researcher, and futurist who is passionate about the role of questions and answers in business and society. His journey started with his research on questions and authored an article on questions that has been recognized by the Association of Human Resource Development as one of the 10 articles that will shape the 21st century. Love to hear more about that as we get more into the podcast. Now, during his research, one simple observation stopped him in his tracks. And he said, we know a lot about questions. We know very little about answers. We teach children about questions, not answers. They learn about the 6 classic questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And they learn about open and closed questions. But as he notes, there is no topology of answers that we teach our children. Journalists, physicians, sales reps, executive coaches, and almost all professionals have been trained in questions, not answers. So business books with questions in titles outnumber books with answers in the title 3-1. So Brian's new book, Answer Intelligence, Raise Your AQ, introduces a new science of answers, and the book has been nominated for a 2022 Prose Award for Professional and Scholarly Excellence. So Answer Intelligence, Raise Your IQ has also been adopted by universities, and there is now a growing network of certified AQ partners around the world working with forward-thinking organizations. And that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about answers, but I think we're going to have to ask you some questions too. So let's have some fun and let's start. Chad?
Sure. So, Brian, this is, an interesting take on, the field of knowledge. Like you said, everything's largely been driven by wanting to answer something in some way or form. What is the central point or the calling point that you're looking to help people with by addressing AQ and with your company, your services, your software? Like, well, what's the one gap? Well, what was the driving gap or the call that caught your attention with it?
Yeah, I look forward to answering that. First, I just want to say, Chad, Michael, thanks for having me. You have a great podcast, and I'm happy to be on it. So thank you. Yeah, so great question. What gap does AQ fill? So let me try to answer that for you. I think, like we've talked about, we know a lot about questions, less about answers. And we sort of extend our thinking a little bit more. We have to think about what is the primary function of a question and answer. And in very basic terms, we ask questions about things we do not know. There is a gap, okay? And the primary function of an answer, and this may have to explain a little bit, is to fill that gap. And when you do so, you influence. So when we look at answers, many of us, probably are not, very self-reflective about questions and answers, and like I have been. But the primary function of an answer is to fill a gap. When that gap is filled, you have influence. So think about it. If you're going to the convenience store and you want to know, how do I find the candy bar? The clerk tells you, right? The 3-step procedure. Go down aisle 1, take a left bottom shelf. You fill the gap. The clerk has influenced you. We provide answers for ourselves. So when we're a new emerging leader, we ask ourselves basic questions. What is leadership? Why do I want to be a leader? How do I lead? And when we provide these answers for ourselves, we connect to answers, we influence ourselves. So the importance of AQ is, pointing out that answers are important for influence. They're deserving of our attention. We should focus on them. And that's my response. let me see what you think about that and what kind of follow-up questions you might have.
So I guess one question I have on top of my head. So the three of the primary functions of communication, persuasion, informing people, or entertaining. Where's that boundary in your approach between the persuasion and the information? As far as compelling or persuading someone to do something or having that influence versus the technical know-how to do something.
Yeah, I think persuasion versus information. I'm not making huge distinctions between those. When you give someone information, you're in a mild form, persuading them. If someone tells me, how do I find the candy bar, I don't think you would think that's persuasive. It's more informational. So I think in my framework, we're not primarily focused on huge distinctions between information and persuasion, but both information and persuasion are about knowledge that you give someone to do something and operate in the world. So, I guess that's how I'd respond to that question. Is we're not making huge distinctions between those two. And then when you're thinking about, I know this gets to another point of your question because it was an interesting question. When we think about use of answers, it's answers for yourself or for others. So there's sort of they can be used in both ways. So let me turn it back to you, as I don't think I fully answered your question, because there was a couple parts to it, and I'm not sure if I unpacked it fully. I don't think I did.
Well, I think that's I think it's how we communicate isn't isolated to one particular thing. Very rarely, is it only to influence? Is it only to tell someone how to do? Is it only to entertain them at some level or something like that? So I guess to kind of loop around that is when you approach it with like an AI type of approach, does it favor, or how do you set it up to favor one of those different areas? Like if it's an algorithm type approach, how does that approach the influence task?
Yeah,
is it doing the influencing, or is it providing the information to the user for them to decide how they're going to be influenced? Or maybe I'm misinterpreting what that role is by the AI part.
Well, okay, the AI part. First, let me talk about sort of different answer types, and they serve different purposes. So, stories and metaphors emotionally connect. So we associate those a lot with like persuasion, perhaps, sort of conventionally. Theory and action are analytical. Procedures and action are practical. And so these are serving different purposes. So but all of these answers are forms of knowledge. Take a metaphor. It's a it's a comparison that's connecting to experiences. It's a form of knowledge. Story is a form of knowledge. These are all types of knowledge. So with AI can basically provide each of these answer types an output. So we have these different answer types, and the extent to which you accept these answers, is a complicated thing. Extent to which it influences you, it's going to be comprised of many factors. The quality of the answer itself, how that answer connects with the other answers, so on and so forth. So, someone, may not necessarily be persuaded by, a definition of something, a concept, but there can be times when you can be persuaded by that, or you need that. Like, let me give you an example. So if you're in a company and you're doing employee engagement and you think that's really important, say you have a story that you connect to, and employee engagement is what we should do. On some level, it's going to be very helpful if someone can provide you a definition of employee engagement and sort of break it down into different dimensions, part of a concept, because it's going to give you greater command of it. So if I was going to say employee engagement consists of cognitive engagement, you think about the job a lot, emotional engagement, when a company does well, you're excited, when it does poorly, you're sad, physical engagement, you have the stamina to do the job. For someone that really wants to lead like an employee engagement initiative, that definition and those dimensions actually can be very influential for you. And so it's an interesting thing. So when is something entertaining, informational, persuasive? Our framework isn't really centrally focused on that, or the mapping to that hasn't been done explicitly, but sort of that example of the concept, hopefully it gives you a sense that, even something seemingly as dry as a concept can be persuasive to the person that needs that answer. So let me turn it back to you. Your questions are really tough, nuanced questions. So I'm not sure, again, please let me know where else you want to go with this.
Well, no, I think it's very interesting in the progression of it, and it's the whole AI field is very new, and one of these I've spent about 15 years in the IT industry doing software development and program management before I switched into doing different types of communications, coaching, and leadership work, and so that's why I'm always interested to see where that interface is. What's that bridging action between as AI develops. Or, one thing else I was thinking when I was, reading through, your website and, listening to stuff that you've been saying is what would be like, what would be an application of it that you think that people could benefit, or that would be like the ideal, because people are going to hear this and they might not understand what it is or understand how to use it quite yet, like a lot of stuff right now, unless they're making faces of themselves 20 years in the future. What would you say is that's the thing people need to be, it's going to make your life or your job better?
Yeah, I think taking a step back before I explicitly answer that, the answer intelligence framework is a framework of questions and answers. So if you go to the website, raiseyouraq.com, the first page, there's this wheel of 6 answers surrounded by questions. It's developed by research with expert communicators, and there's certain principles of how the questions and answers are combined and navigated, and so that's what that is. Then if you think of AI, it's essentially a question and answer machine. It's a lot of parallels. It's a black box. What AI does is not human thinking. It sort of parallels human thinking, but the way it derives its answers is very different. So the purpose of AQ, as it's interfacing with AI and sort of our software, is sort of have answer intelligence as a front end. You have AI, and then results can come back, and answer intelligence as a back end. Sort of structures and organizes this knowledge in a way that can be navigated by humans. And that sounds sort of maybe hard to get your head wrapped around, but on a very basic level, with the research we've done, there's question and answer mapping. So if you ask a what question, it relates to concept and metaphor. So if we talk about something like, what is leadership? I can give you a concept and metaphor. I can say, to me, leadership is inspiring others and holding them accountable to achieve a goal. Concept. Leadership as a metaphor is 2 ropes. When the ropes are separate, they're strong. When they're braided together, they're stronger. That's how I lead. Each meeting, I inspire and hold people accountable. So when you're going into and out of AI, there's an organization with AQ, as simple as it may sound, to organize the output so its concepts and metaphors map to what questions. So one, I'm saying there's a very basic structuring of information that's important. Now, second, like to give you an idea of specific applications, if you're an emerging leader, and going back to what we already talked about, you want to ask and answer these basic questions. What is leadership? Why do I lead? How do I lead? You have to connect to answers for yourself. So AQ can be a way to organize and structure that navigation. And as you're doing it, for example, there can be screens like when you're trying to identify a metaphor of leadership, where there will be 5 metaphors from AI for you to choose from. So what we're doing, among other things, is finding ways to navigate answer sets that are potentially, at the extreme, they're infinitely wide and deep when you look at AI. And it's about navigating that content. So now myself as a, let's say, emerging leader, if I'm working with a coach, I can navigate through these answer sets and sort of identify answers that I connect with. And they're organized and formatted in such a way that they're searchable, and I can work with a coach and we can upskill. So it's allowing you to sort of connect to better answers faster. So that's one application. And there's other applications, but that's that's something that's useful for people is to connect to the answers that are most valuable to them, better, quicker, faster, in a searchable, shareable way, etc.
So if I can get in a word here, then you guys are at a much higher level than I thought. I've got to reach higher, because I only got a 30 on raise your AQ. So I want to talk to you about that. So on your website, you have a test, right? Raise your AQ. And I got an AQ score of 30%. So, and says your score is likely low because you're not familiar with AQ. Well, that's true. So now, what do I do with that? I got a 30. How do I improve? And tell me about that. Why did I get a 30?
Yeah. So there's Michael's speaking about a free assessment, the AQ exploration we have on our website. Anyone can take it. When you take it, AI will generate a topic and different questions, and you simply have to identify how different questions might relate to different answer types. And so you have the 6 answer types, and you just choose one of them each time, and you go through this. Then you get a score, and the score is based upon the high AQ practices, basically how answers are combined and used when we did research with expert communicators. And a lot of these are pretty basic. And when you get the results, there's a report you can navigate. So one thing is look at the report, go through that. But it's also designed to work in combination with coaching and consulting with a certified partner who has knowledge and training and tools and things like that. So it's sort of some basic points. But what I think the AQ test is getting at to start with is that people are not aware of how questions and answers map to each other. So, for example, I had a pharmaceutical company, 250 sales reps fill out the AQ exploration, and a couple things were noteworthy. First of all, the 2 best salespersons in the company scored 100%, which is pretty rare for someone doing it the first time. And so that was sort of interesting. Second thing of note, about I think 7 of the 250 respondents, these are all sales reps, put story for every single answer. So we have certain training in communication that says, stories are really important. And then this subset of individuals said story is the only answer you ever need. You just use that over and over again. When I was doing keynotes and workshops with them, I sort of used the following example to sort of hopefully dissuade those that have that view. And I said, again, doubling down on something may have alluded to here, but you go to the convenience store clerk, you go to the convenience store and you ask the clerk, how do I find a Mars candy bar? You want a procedural answer. Go down aisle 1, take a left bottom shelf. Or
you don't want him to tell you a story. You don't want him to tell you.
You got the punchline. And to hear the story of Mars Candy Bar, most people are going to be really annoyed by that. If you're on vacation, it could be the best thing in your vacation, but it's extremely high risk. So that, that points out that there's different answer types you have to have command of. And that's ultimately the touchstone for AQ, is that people are not aware of answer types. They're not aware of how they map to questions. If you don't understand what the mapping is, then how are you possibly going to, successfully navigate conversations? So that's like ground zero. And then on top of that, you can layer on different techniques and principles of using AQ. But to answer your question, Michael, once you read more about AQ, you learn a little bit more, hear examples like I just mentioned, and it's sort of, I think, is obvious. It's something that's hiding in plain sight that we all can do. And if you have a coach or trainer with you, they can accelerate the process.
So that actually is enlightening, I guess. What I take away from your response is that what's hiding in plain sight is the fact that most of us don't know how to connect our answers to the questions that we're asked. And so what you've got here with AQ is you've basically defined it as, stories and metaphors, theory, and then, I'm sorry, stories and metaphors, which are the metaphor, the analytical or theory, and what's
theory,
and what?
Theory.
Yep. And then the other two which are practical, are
procedure and action.
Procedure and action. Got it. Okay. So I can understand that I can improve by understanding. I can improve that score by really understanding when somebody has a question, whether that is I'm going to respond with a story or a metaphor, whether I'm going to respond with theory or a concept, or whether I'm going to respond with a procedure and action. So if I'm more aware of that, then I can actually not only improve my communication skills, but I can also elevate whatever profession I'm in, because I can be better at it. And I guess that's really
that's basically it. It's question and answer mapping. Then it's understanding what each of the answer types are and what makes them high quality. People have just not thought about this. So. Right. If you start to do a workshop with someone, very quickly someone's going to say, "What's the difference between a metaphor and story?" And then they haven't made these distinctions, and all this can be very helpful. Like, here's an example of another sort of small insight when you're learning about AQ. When we did the original research with the top golf instructors in the world, that's where it all started.
I was going to ask you about that. That was just off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I guess why them? Two before I give this point, two reasons. There's over 25,000 golf instructors in the U.S. alone, and we interviewed those in the golf. I think it's Golf Digest Top 50, Golf Magazine Top 100. Maybe I have that reversed, but we interviewed individuals globally. So these are individuals in the upper half of the 99th percentile of their profession. So first, it's always good to study those experts. Second reason, this was an interesting sample, is these golf instructors taught a wide range of clients. So they taught touring pros you see on TV, weekend warriors, your young son or daughter picking up the clubs for the first time. Like, they had this huge range. And that was particularly important from a research standpoint because, there is no restriction of range, meaning that if we found some results with this group of golf instructors because they work with so many different people, there's higher likelihood it might generalize to other contexts. So basically, they're working with people that were extremely motivated to people that were not motivated, extremely skilled, not skilled, et cetera, and so forth. And if we think about our conversations in our everyday lives, those are the kind of conversations we have. We have conversations where, highly motivated people, less motivated, less skilled, et cetera, and so forth. So that's why we chose that sample. And I guess just to give you this insight, and then I'll turn it back to you. When we're doing the research, one of the golf instructors, shared this example where he had a client that was basically like an executive, a junior executive, and he asked the golf instructor to help him hit the golf ball really far. That's all he wanted to do. Basically wanted to impress people that he could drive the ball really far. And he really didn't care like where it went. It just had to go far. And I instantly thought, oh my gosh, the golf instructor, he's going to straighten this guy out and he's going to say, you know, that's not what we do in golf, right? Because, you know, frankly, that's sort of how I thought about things as a professor, right? You know, let's not do goofy stuff. Let's do it the right way, right? Let's learn, you know, these concepts. And what the golf instructor said was the opposite of what I was thinking. He basically helped the executive to hit the ball far. And we saw this result again and again in you know, other interviews, and we started to say this was you know, the idea of honoring the question. And I think if you reflect on that in your own conversations or the next conversation you have with someone, nothing is more frustrating than if you ask a question and they do not answer it. And basically in AQ terms, if you ask, going back to, you know, CVS, you know, convenience store, if I ask, how do I find a candy bar? I want a procedure or action answer. I do not want a story that is going to frustrate me. And, you know, so many people, myself included, we go into conversations and we do not honor the question. We do not answer it. We choose to answer it in some other way. And it's very frustrating.
So, question I got for you, Brian. As Brian, the person that's, you know, driving this, working on this, what's been like the highlight or something really fun that's come out of doing this? That's like, you know, kind of, you know, made you smile, made it worth it. You know.
That's true. It's fun. I guess my idea of fun may be different than other people, but let's see. What has been fun about this? You know, I think, you know, what's been fun is you know, just working with people and raising their awareness about this very basic point. And usually there's a fun reaction from people. They usually say, never thought about AQ, think it makes sense, I'm interested in learning more. And I don't know, at a very basic level, I find that you know, something rewarding. I don't know if it's fun per se. But I will say this, you know, when I first started with AQ, one of the biggest challenges was moving people outside of story. You know, particularly when I started to discuss AQ, you know, I don't discuss it the same way maybe I did before when I first started doing the research. And I would sort of go off and explain it, and then basically people would reduce it to story and say, yeah, stories are really interesting. And I say, no, it's more than stories. Story is only one of 6 answer types. And I guess it was sort of rewarding for me because at some point people stopped saying that to me, and I don't know what I did differently, but the connection became better of what it really was.
Well, I think that's a big point too, because, you know, over the past however many years recently, you know, this trend of everything has to be a story, or you lead by story. You just, and like you said, it's a tool. It's one way of doing it versus, you know, there's this delusion of like, oh, I'm a storyteller. You know, is it really getting you to where you want to be in the right situations? So I thought that was a really, you know, interesting observation on that, Brian. Michael, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. But, you know, it's interesting because you are definitely going against the grain here. You know, look, I'm a sales professional. I train people in sales. I've been in sales, so on and so forth. And, you know, part of being in sales is all about telling a story. I'm looking at my shelf and I see primal storytelling, so on and so forth. So that seems to be right now, that is the trend in sales. The other one is also asking questions, asking the right questions. And interestingly enough, asking a question and then answering the question with another question, not with an answer.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's fascinating, and I understand when you say honoring the question, and nothing is more frustrating than not getting an answer. But on the other hand, you know, from, you know, the communication in a sales type of situation, you ask a question, you get an answer, you're going to ask another question, and again to probe deeper into
Yeah.
really understanding, because it's not just the top level, it's what's beneath it. And the only way to get that way is to consistently ask the right question.
Yeah. A couple of responses to that. First of all, I don't think I necessarily disagree with anything you're saying. I think, it's about, this is a different framework, and it has touch points to other things. Like, for example, story is one of the 6 answers. So I like stories. I like books about stories. But I think there should equally be books about the other answer types. And to some extent there is. If you look at, for example, Research on Habits, Atomic Habits, it's largely a book about procedures and actions. And there's, so you see these other pieces. If you go to LinkedIn, most posts by thought leaders are posts about concepts. They're basically declarations of concepts. Leadership is great. Here's 10 attributes of leadership. That's more or less what they are. So you see a lot of these other answer types. Another point is that, I believe questions and answers are both important. So it's called answer intelligence because that's new with the book, and that's intellectually where the main contribution is. But the framework, is answers surrounded by questions. It's both. So if I had to sort of describe an ideal conversation, I would describe it like this. Think of a dinner conversation with a friend. So your last dinner conversation you had with a friend, if it was a nice conversation, it probably had a couple attributes. 1, both sides spoke about equally. 2, both sides asked and answered questions about equally. 3, both sides cared about each other. And that's sort of a nice conversation. So I think you can extend that conversation to other business contexts, and I think it generally will hold true. So that conversation, it's about balance. It's about, it's not a monologue where one side just asks questions over and over again. And I think from a sales perspective, there's actually, a fair amount of evidence that supports what I just said. And I think you'd probably agree with what I'm saying. In my book, there's a sales AQ chapter co-authored by Gong and Salesforce, and looked at some of Gong's data. They do, for those that don't know, record sales calls and you can analyze them. And basically what they found was sales calls that were more effective were basically what I just described. They were balanced. Both sides spoke about equally. The quickest way to lose was asking, too many questions in a row. You're going to lose. Nobody wants like 5 questions in a row. So I think, that's one point. And I'll just make one other one. It's sort of a very different point. This idea of questions and answers going back and forth. You can't reduce it necessarily to one formula. It's not like I ask 5 questions and then I know more about the prospect and then I move forward. That's very rote. That's very amateurish. What's more effective is to know dynamically, who asks which questions at which time. It might be 2 questions in a row by you, maybe 1 answer, 2 answers, something like that. But you want to have the back and forth. If you don't have back and forth, then that's not good. Another thing about just asking questions is that the person you're asking may not know the answer. So if you're asking a million questions they don't know the answer to, is that really the best approach? So anyways, 2 responses, very sort of different, but just sort of trying to get at the subtlety of this and the fact that I think it is probably consistent with, things you might, subscribe to already, Michael.
Well, I like what you said, and I think there's room for both of our opinions, because we're really not very different in what we're saying or what we believe in. I think we're running out of time. I can see and I'm sure we could go on longer. I guess what I wanted to summarize for a moment would be, I think what you said, we're looking for that ideal conversation. And that ideal conversation is where we speak equally, we ask questions and answers relatively equally, and then we, care about each other and we demonstrate that in the conversation. And I think that I think this will be it's a very interesting approach. I think I'm going to take this in my sales approach a little bit more, looking for this balance, and certainly look at the 6 types of answers, because I think that really is that's very significant. And I'm impressed with that. Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate learning about this.
So, Brian, in closing, lately in the news, actually over about the past year, there's been a lot of change and turbulence, specifically in the IT industry. Reductions in force, stuff like that. Duolingo just came out and announced their reduction 10% of the contractors, replacing them with AI, they say. AI is coming. It's not going to be stopped. As someone that's on the leading edge, in the industry, what would you advise people as far as for them to be competitive and prepared in the future in the workforce, from a mindset perspective, from a skill set perspective? Like, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so I would say, and this is specifically in the respect to communication, but I think you could probably generalize this to other points. My view of AI is that it is like a large ball of rubber bands. It's very big. We can't ignore it. It's huge. But innovation always occurs at the periphery. So you can put a rubber band around the outside, and that's important. So what I'm getting at there is encourage people to use AI to integrate it with what they're doing, but humans and how humans think can always add value on top of it. So I think if you have that mindset and AI as a tool, you're going to do some really great things. And to some extent, I'll say, even though AI is new and different and dynamic, in some sense, I sort of view it as not new or different. If we just look at it from a knowledge standpoint, before AI, we had, the internet, and you would Google things and you'd come up with results, and, smart people that were, doing their work, they would use the internet for their work, and have them propel them forward. And it's, I think that principle still extends with AI, is you use it to propel your work forward, and, view yourself as someone that can put the rubber band around the outside. And if you can do that, you're going to be fine, because you're just leveraging what's already out there. But if you're trying to put the rubber band in the middle of the ball and do something that AI can do, then you're probably going to be in trouble. But for almost any industry, there's that opportunity to put that rubber band on the outside. And it's particularly true for communication, but I think this might generalize to other professions.
Well, that's a great answer. Very interesting.
All right, Michael.
Well, I get the feeling, Chad, we could ask Brian a bunch more questions, but I think we're just about out of time. And I have found this conversation fascinating. Thank you very much for your answers. And Chad, thank you for your questions, because without your good questions, you weren't going to get some good answers, and you got them. So for sure. So I'm good, Chad.
Any closing remarks, Brian? Anything you'd like to share? We know your website, how people can get a hold of you and learn more.
Yeah, the website is raiseyouraq.com. There's a free test you can take on it. And if you're interested in contacting me, there's a contact form on the website. Look forward to hearing from you. And I just want to say thank you, Chad and Michael. Very thought-provoking discussion, and you stumped me several times. So I think I'm going to have to review this discussion, and you've given me some more things to think about. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
I'm glad you've enjoyed, because I always look for ways I can learn something too, because there's always something to learn. And I hope everybody in the audience has also gotten something out of this. We'll include these links to Brian's website in the show notes as well. Again, thank you very much, Brian. Michael, thank you again. And this is it for this episode, and we will see you next time. Everybody stay safe, stay warm. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye, and thanks again.